something about the process that doesn't always stick, particularly when it comes to this working as a team together to meet reasonable deadlines in a sustainable way. Now, the sprint leader is going to see another advantage here, which is that the test effort in the sprint is not going to vary. The number of testers will be determined at the outset of the set of sprints typically, and the sprint leader doesn't have to worry about their tester getting quote unquote pulled away onto other things. But this again, is the tester is now becoming part of the project team, less and less connected in that way to the test team. So the advantages are almost a zero-sum game sort of advantages, because they bring with them a number of sprint silo disadvantages. Now when I say these are disadvantages, I'm not saying that these necessarily will happen, and it would happen on all projects, but they can happen, and they do happen. We have observed them happening on various project teams. So one of them is the potential loss of independence. Tester is not feeling empowered to make an independent assessment of quality, or to communicate that assessment to the appropriate people, or they feel like when they do communicate their assessment, it is not effectively passed on. Tester, being in a silo, doesn't necessarily have a full system-level perspective from broader contact across the organization and across the product, so then that tends to reduce the tester's defect detection effectiveness, particularly for interoperability and end-to-end issues. The testers start to make mistakes in these situations related to gaps and overlap, because there is not a way of coordinating the activities across the test teams. In this case, the test teams being as a team, and often a team of one in each one of the silos. Now, the test manager, of course, has now, to some extent, lost the ability to manage the overall workload of their resources, the people working for her or him, and that can then mean that if there is a problem that I just have discussed earlier, the rampant overtime problem, then that of course is going to lead to increased turnover. And in the long run, the fact that the test manager can't direct people to do things that are independent of a sprint can lead to a reduced ability to put in place a consistent, powerful, and maintainable test system. Everybody's so focused on testing that needs to be done on this sprint, they're not necessarily thinking about one in the long term, particularly from an automated regression test point of view. What do we need here? Now, these disadvantages are not inherent in Agile, and as I mentioned before, some of these things are definitely in the quote-unquote "that's not Agile" situation category. But we do see a number of Agile practices that have accentuated these problems, and there are challenges to be managed. So how do we deal with them? Well, the test manager of a truly independent test team will have to introduce centripetal centralizing forces to bind the team together and to make its actions consistent. And this will balance out the sprint-specific centrifugal or outward-pushing forces. Making sure that there's sufficient time set aside for people to communicate with each other about what they're doing, read each other's bug reports, have regular discussions about what's being covered and what's not, and so forth. There needs to be as I said, a centralizing type of force to balance out the diffusing forces that will arise from the sprint silos. Now, here comes Agile heresy of the highest order, but it is something that we have seen some of our clients try, and something that we think can work if done appropriately, and this is the separate test sprint after the development sprint. Now, again, I can hear the Agile purists howling, even with your phones muted. But as I said at the outset, my objective here is to help clients play the hand they're dealt, not necessarily to observe the pure Agile, if you will. Now, if the sprint problems, sprint silo problems, other disadvantages that can come about because of the sprint silo and can be dealt with without violating the rules of Agile, I'm all for it. But the important thing is that the independent test team, which is as we've seen it through our assessments, the most effective defect finding instrument that any organization typically has, needs to be preserved, and those capabilities need to be defended. So by whatever means necessary, you need to preserve that you have an effective independent test team. Now, if you do go this separate test sprint approach and adopt the Agile heresy that I've just spouted off here, make sure that you remain engaged as a test manager or tester in the development sprint, because otherwise you're just exchanging one set of blind spots for another set of blind spots. And in fact, what you'd be doing is going back to the worst practice of the waterfall model, where code just comes flying over the fence to you at the end of some sort of completely opaque development period, and you have no idea what it does or how to deal with it. So you do want to remain engaged in the development sprint, following the usual rules of the Agile methodologies, but then having perhaps the separate test sprint at the end if you need it. Now, another challenge here, and this is sort of a philosophical or I don't know, sociological, I think is maybe the better word, challenge, is related to a concept put forward by the analyst company Gartner. And you can go out to their website, I think it's Gartner.com, to take a look at this. Do a search for hype cycle on Gartner's website. The hype cycle is something that Gartner, as analysts, have observed very commonly in technology in general. They say that the new ideas and new technologies go through this hype cycle, and the hype cycle consists of 5 pieces, if you will, 5 stages. Now, the technology trigger, this is where the idea generates a lot of press and a lot of interest. And those of you who follow software engineering and IT, and remember, oh yeah, I first started hearing about that Agile stuff in 1999, 2000, 2001, right? So that's kind of the technology trigger point. And then what has happened over the last few years is that you're moving into the next stage of the hype cycle, which is the peak of inflated expectations. And this is where Gartner says you have a frenzy of publicity that generates a lot of enthusiasm and unrealistic expectations, and there tend to be a lot of consultants pushing the idea of this hyped concept. And this of course, is pretty well known. I mean, there's a book called Fad Surfing in the Boardroom that came out in the mid-'90s that talked about exactly this kind of thing, and